right, Roswell's Little Green Men, Chapter 10. I always feel like I'm on like The Price is Right. Like, maybe not really. We'll pretend. All right, Chapter 10. Max waited until Kyle and the sheriff, the last two, arrived back. While he waited, he sat on a stool working on a plate of French fries that Michael had made for everyone to munch on. Alex had made himself a chocolate milkshake, and Tess had settled for Coke when it was clear that starting the coffee maker was going to be too much trouble. The fries were good and salty. Max had pulled a plate aside for him and Tess so that they could pour Tabasco on theirs. No matter how many times the others had seen him do that, it still grossed them out. But he was hungry. None of them had had dinner. He was wondering if he could get Michael to cook some burgers. It might be a stretch. Michael wasn't the happiest of campers right now. Apparently searching with Maria hadn't gone as well as Max had hoped it would. Max's search hadn't gone well either. The warehouses and mall area were as dead as they could be on a Sunday night, and it didn't take any more than a drive past to see that. Still, they had gotten out and looked around. Tess had a few other ideas about where to search, and Max went along with her. Even though he had kept an eye out for the Army's new base, he'd found his mind wandering. He kept wishing he were with Liz instead. He wondered if Tess could sense that. She seemed cranky, too, by the time they'd gotten back. Kyle and Valenti came through the front door. As they did, Valenti grinned. His was the only positive reaction they'd had all night, and it gave Max hope. "None of the rest of us has found anything," Max said. "Have you?" "Yeah," Valenti said. "We found them." Kyle nodded. "They're in one of the warehouses. We watched an Army truck bring in another group." "Warehousing people?" Tess asked and shuddered. They might be running out of room at the hospital," Liz said. "Which warehouse?" Max asked. "Just inside the Army base," Valenti said. "We got as close as we dared," Kyle said. Valenti nodded. "From the looks of it, there are about 100 of them in the warehouse. Everyone is still in the hospital. Everyone else is still in the hospital." Max didn't ask how he got the information. More than likely, it hadn't done his job any more good to be asking questions. "You didn't ask me about the hospital," Maria said. Max looked at her. She raised her eyebrows at his surprised expression. He had to admit she did look better with her normal skin color. As she had said, green did not become her. "You were just concerned with where the Army had taken everyone," Maria said. "You forgot that I was supposed to check on the employee situation." He had forgotten. After thinking about Liz and Kyle, Tess and Isabel being trapped, the blue water, and all those green people, his brain was having trouble considering anything else. "Well," he asked. Maria settled into her chair and grinned. "The regular graveyard shift is supposed to arrive at the hospital at 11. They'll be let in, but I don't think they're going to let the previous shift go home." "I'll bet that makes for some tired hospital workers," Alex said. "Pissed off ones is my bet," Michael said. Max nodded. He would have to agree with that. "What that means," Maria said loudly so everyone would listen to her, "is that we might be able to get in, but I'm not sure when we can get out." "That's a chance we're going to have to take," Max said. "Well, the longer we take at this, the less chance we are going to get everyone in time." Liz was fidgeting in her chair. She was clearly ready to get moving. So was Max. He turned to Michael. "I need you to take Alex and Kyle and get that water truck, get it filled and the water treated, and get it dumped into the cave. Do a second load if you don't run into problems, but one load is critical." Michael nodded and then glanced at Alex and Kyle, who looked less excited about following Michael's lead. Max did the same. "You both up for helping?" "Remember that blue water coming out of your tap?" Michael said. "I said I was in," Kyle frowned as if he'd been insulted. "I haven't changed my mind." "And I'm not going to miss all the excitement," Alex said. "Although if Isabel needs help." He didn't finish the sentence. Max understood his predicament, but it was probably better to keep Alex away from Isabel. After all, Alex didn't need the extra ego blow of meeting Isabel's college-age date. Sheriff Valenti tossed Kyle 2 keys. "That's to the maintenance shed. No parking, no point in breaking in if you don't have to. The keys to the water truck are in a small safe. The second key opens it." "Thanks," Max said to Valenti. Valenti only shrugged. "Giving them my permission to use the truck keeps them from breaking too many laws." "Yeah, right," Michael said, smiling at the sheriff. Max turned to Michael and Alex and Kyle. "You need to get that truck back and the shed locked as quickly as you can." "No kidding," Michael said, standing. "We'll take care of it, I promise. 2 loads if we can, 1 for sure." Try not to be seen, Valenti said. I don't think anyone will be on the roads tonight, but you just never know. His unspoken words sent a shiver down Max's back. If the wrong person saw them, they'd never get to the cure into the water system. Max turned to Liz. She looked so serious sitting there, her wide eyes watching him. His heart still jumped whenever their gazes met. He wondered if hers did too. Do you have the stuff they should use to treat the water? He asked, his voice harsher than usual. She gave him a small, hurt smile as if she understood the reason for his grumpiness. Right here. She picked up some jars from the counter and handed them to Michael. Put one jar full in each truckload of water. All right, he said, handing one jar to Alex and putting the other in his jacket pocket. Let's go. Not without a kiss for good luck, Maria said, putting her arms around Michael's neck and kissing him hard. That should be enough to hold all three of us, Alex said after a few seconds. Michael finally broke away, tapped Maria on the forehead, and turned away with a see ya. We'll meet back here when we're done, Max said as the three friends headed for the front door of the cafe. Be careful, Maria said. Max knew he would never get used to sending people, his friends, into danger and trouble. He watched the three of them leave, wishing there was any other way of doing this. There wasn't. Not if he was going to save a lot of people and keep the attention of the national press and other organizations away from Roswell. And the 4 alien teens. Max turned to Liz. I need you and Maria to try to get into the hospital. I'm way ahead of you, leader boy, Maria said. I've already got the uniforms laid out upstairs. I've volunteered at that hospital for years. It won't be a problem. Liz smiled at Max and he felt the warmth. I have enough of the plasma to spike all of the water in the place, she said, tapping the pocket of her jacket. We'll make it work. Liz handed him 3 mustard-sized jars. These are for you 3. I've left 2 other jars this full upstairs in my bedroom just in case. Good, Max said, taking the jars full of his own blood plasma. Thanks. Then he turned to Tess and the sheriff. Looks like it's up to us to break into the army base and see what we can do for the people there. He handed each of them a jar, then put one he was keeping in his coat pocket. We can do it, Tess said. We've been in and out of there before. I'm counting on that, Max said. Let's go get dressed, Maria said, pulling Liz toward the stairs. We've got to be on time tonight. There are going to be some miracle cures in the hospital tonight. Seems like we specialize in them, Liz gave Max a wide grin. He didn't smile back. She kept giving him mixed signals, and he didn't have the energy for that tonight. Max specializes in them, Tess said. Max felt a surge of irritation. We wouldn't have solved this without Liz, he reminded her. I know, she said, and gave Liz a friendly smile. It made him wonder if he imagined the bite to her previous comment. Maria continued to pull Liz towards the kitchen door. Take care, Max said to them, and see if you can find Isabel while you're in there. He wanted to do all these jobs himself, especially the search for his sister. Don't worry, Liz said. She can take care of herself. You just worry about getting onto that army base and getting those people back to normal. Max nodded, and then with Tess at his side, he turned and headed for the door. Everyone knew what they had to do. Getting it done was going to be another matter altogether. There was no way Isabel was going to be able to sleep sitting up in a classroom with a dozen people snoring around her and lights turned on full. She kept expecting the instructor to come striding onto the stage at any moment and start talking. Instead, the guards remained at their posts, and people either talked in low tones or tried to sleep or did sleep and snore. The woman 10 seats in a row up to her left snored like she was coughing and choking at the same time. She wasn't wearing a wedding ring, and Isabel could understand why. No one would be able to get a good night's sleep with her in the room. Maybe after they were released, Isabel would tell the woman to go get checked. She might have some sort of sleep disorder. Her snoring certainly didn't sound healthy. Behind the woman and 6 more chairs over, another man, clearly with no difficulty sleeping while sitting up, had a more traditional snore that had some pretty good volume to it and even rumbled the metal on the seats around him. Between him and the woman coughing and choking, it was amazing anyone in the room had even dozed. She eased herself out of the chair and stretched slowly, trying to give her aching muscles and tired mind something to do. Even reading a book would be better than just sitting there hour after hour. She moved out of the row and down in front of the stage where a table full of drinks and rolls were displayed. At least the army was feeding them well so far. A few men earlier had gotten angry and demanded to talk to someone in charge. They were taken out into the hallway and about 10 minutes later came back in with the looks of resignation on their faces. Isabel overheard one of them say the doctors were treating this skin problem like a plague, and no one was going anywhere anytime soon. Isabel could have told him that. Over the first few hours after dinner, another 20 people had turned green and had been taken away. From what Max had told her, it was the alien cells in water that was causing the problem. Those last to turn must have come in contact with the contaminated water later than those they had brought in, or their systems were slower in absorbing it and moving it through their skin systems. Or, more than likely, they hadn't showered in it or drank full glasses of water like the others might have, but instead just touched it somehow. Now, Isabel figured there were less than 60 people in the room, and the rate of the turning green was halted. It looked like everyone in this room who had come in contact with contaminated water had already gone through the change. Now, things were so quiet she couldn't stop thinking of Rob, and that just got her worrying even more. If only the soldiers would sleep or stop being so vigilant, she might be able to escape, but so far she hadn't had a single opportunity. About an hour earlier, a team of doctors had come in and gone from person to person asking questions, waking up the snoring ones as well. They had asked Isabel who she had seen coming with her relationship to Rob. They seemed satisfied it was only a first date and moved on quickly, which gave Isabel a sense of relief. The last thing she needed was to be taken and tested for anything. Behind her, the woman coughed and choked, then went right on sleeping. Isabel shook her head, picked up a Danish, and went back to her chair. It was going to be a very long night, but the worst of that happened was no sleep. She wasn't going to feel lucky about it. She was going to feel lucky about it.
Chapter 11. Michael could tell he was going to have to use his powers to unlock the fence gate. He motioned for Alex and Kyle to wait in the brush and shadows behind him, and then moved up to the gate and studied the padlock. He wanted to be able to relock the gate again and not have anyone tell that someone had even been there, so he was going to have to open it carefully, not destroy it in the process. The county vehicle compound was a fenced yard illuminated by bright highlights on 3 poles. It was situated at the end of a road just outside of town off the main highway. A few houses were down the road closer to the highway, but around the yard itself was nothing but brush, some trees, and desert. The night was getting cold enough that Michael could see his own breath, and his hands were feeling the bite of the spring night as well as he studied the area. There were a dozen different tractors and dump trucks sitting along the fence line near the gate. A large building filled most of the compound, with 3 garage doors and a smaller regular door, all facing the gate as well. He had keys from Valenti for the water truck and the building, but not this gate. Maybe Valenti forgot it was here or just didn't have a key to it. Just to be sure, Michael tried both keys the sheriff had given him on the lock. Neither would even go into the lock hole. Standing in the light made Michael feel as if he were on a stage and 100 people were watching. But the Sunday night around him was so quiet, not even a dog was barking. And the few houses that were in sight from the yard had their blinds pulled, more than likely to keep out the light from the compound than a need for privacy. Michael did a quick check along the fence line to make sure no security cameras were in place, or any alarms or dogs inside the fence. Nothing, or at least nothing he could see. They would find out soon enough if there was something more. He put his palm over the lock and focused on opening it. After a moment, it clicked and fell open, the sound impossibly loud in the still night air. He pulled the lock free and hung it on the fence, then opened the gate enough to get through and motioned that Alex and Kyle follow him. Then he headed at a brisk walk toward the building, Valenti's keys ready in his hand. Alex and Kyle, moving like thundering elephants, caught him just as he pushed the door open and stepped inside. "I hate this," Kyle whispered, breathing hard as they looked around the dimly lit garage. I'm not loving it," Alex whispered back. "You volunteer," Michael said. I never did stuff like this before I got involved with you guys," Kyle whispered. Michael bit back a harsh reply. He wasn't real fond of Kyle either, but Valenti had been a friend more than once. Amazing how a guy with a great dad could turn out so weird. "Remember, green skin," Michael said. "He's right," Alex said. "There are hundreds stuck like we were. Let's get this done." "Oh, good. No more whining," Michael said. "I didn't promise that," Alex said. The water truck was tucked against the far wall of the garage on the other side of 2 dump trucks. On the wall was a huge water tap with a short hose that dropped down into the water truck's tank. A logical setup. Fill the water truck before even taking it out of the garage. Save money, time, and fuel. Seemed almost too logical for the government. Michael climbed up on the small ladder on the tanker's side and shined a small flashlight he had brought into the open tank. Empty. They wouldn't leave it sitting full, Kyle said. That would rust it out too quickly and be too hard on the tires. Yeah, Michael understood that, but just once he'd like things to be easy. The longer they were in the garage, the more likely they'd get caught. Even Valenti had been worried about that. He'd warned them not to be seen. Heck, being seen might not be the problem. Being heard might be the problem. Filling the truck wasn't exactly going to be a silent process. Swing that hose over here and let's get it started, Michael said. The hose was larger and heavier than a fire hose and took both Alex and Kyle to boost it up to Michael to put it in the open water truck top. I think that's done differently, Alex said after they were finished. I forgot to read the manual, Michael said. Turn on the water. Slowly. I want to make sure all the values on this baby are closed. Alex twisted the large valve to open up the water flow. The sound seemed to fill the building, echoing and rattling the truck as the water pounded into the bottom of the large tank. Michael was convinced they could hear that much noise all the way to the high school. So much for stealth theft, Kyle said. Michael climbed off the tank and moved around back to the valves that opened to empty the water. They were closed, and the truck was filling it slowly. Turn up the flow, Michael said. Otherwise, this is going to take all night. Alex moved the water valve to full, and the sound increased to a roar that seemed to shake the entire building. Is it supposed to do that? Kyle almost yelled. Michael shushed him. The noise from the water was loud enough. Adding shouting to it wasn't going to help. He moved over to Kyle and put his mouth close to his ear. Stand guard at the door, but keep it mostly closed. Kyle nodded and headed for the door while Michael climbed back up on the truck to see how the water level was. He was stunned to see that the huge tank was almost half full and rising quickly. Under him, the truck groaned and cracked as the weight was added. He signaled for Alex to watch him. Then, as the water got past the three-quarter full mark, he indicated that Alex should slow the flow down. Alex did, but the water level was coming up fast. Michael gave the cut sign, and Alex instantly shut off the water, sending the garage back into a ringing silence. The truck's shocks creaked a few times as the water rocked and settled into the tank. Michael again shined his light through the opening. The level was just below the top hatch. Perfect. Michael pulled out the hose and let it slide down the side of the tanker and bang against the wall. It sounded like a gunshot and made both Kyle and Alex jump. Sorry, Michael whispered loudly, the sound echoing. We're dead, he heard Kyle say more to himself than anyone else. Nothing leaking anywhere? Michael whispered to Alex. Not that I can see or hear, Alex whispered back. And trust me, in here, we'd hear it. Michael nodded and took out one of the jars of Max's plasma that Liz had given him. He dumped it into the water and then eased the lid of the tank closed, latching it before climbing down. All right, let's get ready to open the garage door, Michael said. Kyle, close and lock that door. Kyle did as he was told and came to join them. Michael waited, the truck keys in his hand, until they were all together and he could talk softly. I'll start the truck. Alex, you open the garage door. As he does that, Kyle, you go open the gate. We're closing them behind you, right? Alex asked. Absolutely, Michael said, and lock the gate as well. Kyle nodded. And don't run, Michael said. From one of the houses down the street, we need to look like 3 workers just taking the truck out for some strange reason on a Sunday night. Both Alex and Kyle nodded. All right, let's do it, Michael said, climbing up into the cab of the truck and settling in. Alex and Kyle moved over to the controls of the garage door and stood waiting. It took Michael a moment to get situated, find the keys, check to make sure how many gears the thing had. With something hauling this heavy a load of water, it had to have a lot of speed, and he needed to make sure he didn't grind too many gears leaving. The truck was going to make enough noise on its own without him helping matters along. Finally, he was ready. With a deep breath, he turned the key. The truck's engine turned over once and then fired, clearly well-tuned and maintained. The roar was like standing near a jet airport while planes were taking off. Michael had never heard anything like it. Kyle put his hands over his ears as Alex set the big garage door in front of the water truck in motion. It creaked and squealed so loud Michael could hear it over the sound of the truck engine. There was no chance they were going to bring this truck back here tonight. They'd leave it out on the road and let them find it in the morning if police didn't already have the road barricaded in front of them. Kyle ducked through the partially open garage door and walked towards the outer gate. As soon as the door got above Michael's eye level, he eased the shift into low gear and let out the clutch, feeling for the friction point, trying not to jerk the truck and a very heavy load of water forward. The truck eased towards the door as Alex stepped outside, waiting to close the door behind them. So far, so good. No sign of flashing lights coming for the highway, and the neighbors' blinds were still as they had been when they got here. Clearly, the neighbors were used to people starting up equipment in the middle of the night. Michael got the truck moving slowly out of the garage and towards the fence gate. As he cleared the door, he saw Alex punch the button to lower the door and then jump up on the passenger side running board and open the door. So far, so good, he said. Kyle, standing with the open fence gate in his hand, looked like he had seen a ghost. They were going to be lucky if he didn't have a heart attack. Michael got the truck through the gate in low gear and then stopped, waiting for Kyle to join them. When he did, Michael looked at him. Gate locked? Gate locked, Kyle said, his voice squeaking over the sound of the truck. Garage door closed? Michael asked. Closed and locked, Alex said. Then let's dump this load, Michael said, easing the truck back forward and not even grinding gears as he double-clutched and picked up speed, heading for the highway. Liz stood in front of the guards at the employee entrance to the hospital, the candy striper uniform feeling odd on her skin. Both she and Maria had worn only light jackets, and the nip in the air was biting at her legs and hands. She hadn't expected to have to wait in a line outside. In front of them, a nurse had just been waved through, and 5 others were lined up behind them. The graveyard shift was arriving. They decided that Maria would do all the talking for them, and that was about to happen. Liz could feel her stomach twist into a knot. She didn't know why. The worst that could happen is that they were turned away and would have to find another method of getting the cure to the people inside the hospital. But so far, they hadn't seen an employee sent back to his or her car. Name, floor, and job, the guard asked, holding a clipboard in his hand. Maria, smiling at the man, gave him their names, then told him, We're going to be doing babysitting in the nursery and children's ward. They called us in because the doctors and nurses there were needed on some sort of emergency. Guess an emergency has something to do with you guys being here, huh? The guard nodded and searched his list. I don't see your name on here. Of course not, Maria said. They just called us. All the additional workers are on my list, the guard said. Maria rolled her eyes. They need help in there. I'm sure they're very busy. Do you think they have time to update you every minute? He hadn't looked up from his list. Liz shifted from foot to foot, trying to stay warm. What's the big deal? Maria asked, putting on her most I don't care voice and attitude. We're just coming to work. Is the emergency that bad that you can't use 2 extra set of hands to take care of the kids? Just different, the guard said. The problem is that unless this is cleared up, you might not be able to leave at your normal time. In fact, there's a good chance you might have to stay tomorrow as well. Liz shrugged, acting as if she didn't care. Stay late, miss school tomorrow? Maria asked. She held out her arm. Here, twist it. Make me stay longer than usual, please. The soldier actually smiled, then looked at Liz. Do you care if you're all here longer than expected? Liz shook her head. Not at all. I'd rather be here helping out than taking a math test tomorrow morning, as long as I can call my mom when it gets too late. The guard nodded. Not a problem. All right, let me get your names right, and then you can get into work. Again, Maria repeated their names, and he wrote them on a sheet. Then they were waved inside as the guard turned his attention to the next hospital employee in line. That was too easy, Liz whispered as they headed down the hall. Getting in's no problem, Maria said, but you didn't see anyone leaving, did you? Liz knew that was a very good point. As the guard had warned them, getting out was going to take time, but less time if they could get everyone cured. Maria led Liz down the hall and into the employee lounge. No one was in there at the moment, so they hung their jackets on the coat rack, and then Maria led the way through a back hallway to what looked like some sort of small kitchen and service preparation area. What are we doing? Liz whispered as Maria pulled out a water cart. It was in a long line of carts that looked as if they were being used on this floor for patients taking pills. They had shelves under the top water cooler area, used more than likely for delivering dinners. Maria opened up the top of one of the large silver water containers. Mostly full. Put a few drops of the cure in each of these just in case they're used later. Liz did as Maria instructed, putting just 1 drop in each cooler as Maria stocked the first cart with lots of paper cups, then went to work on a second. Why 2? Liz asked as she finished making sure every water container had the cure in it. They're not going to be holding most of the infected people in single rooms, Maria said. Too many of them. Sophie can find where they're holding the main group, we can split up and get them all to cure quicker. Liz nodded. That made sense. Clearly, Maria had given some thought to how to do this once they got inside. Liz had just expected they would play it by ear. So where do we go first? Liz asked. Any room that has a guard, Maria said. We get a few of the green skin cured, and the attention will shift to them to see what happened, so that no one will pay attention to us helping the larger group, Liz said. Sounded like a pretty lame plan, but at least it was a plan. That's the idea, Maria said, smiling at Liz. Unless, of course, we find the main group first. Okay, Liz said, the knot in her stomach even tighter than now. Add an extra drop or two. Both of these we're using, Maria said. I want to make sure Max's forces have enough power to do the job. Liz laughed, but did as Maria suggested. Ready? Maria asked. As I'll ever be, Liz said. Put a smile on the face and a blank look in those eyes, Maria said. We're just water girls and know nothing, remember? Liz tried to smile, but she could tell it came out more like a sick, worried grimace. You need acting lessons, Maria said, shaking her head. Let me do the talking. You just play the dumb follower. Play, Liz said, feeling exactly like a dumb follower. She'd done her best work. Now it was time to let Maria's outgoing personality shine. Maria laughed all the way out into the hallway as she pushed the first cart. Liz followed her with the second cart, doing her best not to bang it into the wall. Michelle or Sophie, do you want to read 12?
Max sat beside Tess in Valenti's truck, staring ahead as the guard looked in the driver's window. Max could feel his stomach twisting as beside him Tess used her powers to make the guard believe that Valenti was taking 2 generals into the base and that Max actually had feelings for her. Oh, that's not what it says. 2 generals into the base, not 2 high school kids. That was an amazing talent she had. Max wished he knew how she managed it. Don't we all? He also didn't want to admit how nervous it made him. Sometimes it just seemed too easy, and she accepted it as if it were nothing. At least he knew that his powers were strange. Sheriff, the guard said, nodding. Generals, go on in. Then to Max's surprise, the guard stepped back and saluted. Thank you, Valenti said, clearly relieved as the guard finished to salute and the gate opened. Beside Max, Tess let out a deep breath and slumped a little as Valenti took the truck away from the gate. The base seemed more active than usual. Max had never seen so many trucks driving around the compound. Just being here made him nervous. That was harder than it should have been, Tess said. She sounded drained. Max felt slightly guilty. He had just mentally accused her of having no real reactions to the use of her powers. The sheriff shot a worried glance at Tess. He had become almost a father to her, and Max knew that Valenti was feeling protective of her. Why was it hard? Max asked. There were 3 of them, Tess said. The guard and the 2 inside watching the monitors. I had to convince all of them of the sham. Good job, Max said, patting her leg. She put her hand over his. He wanted to pull away, but thought better of it. He needed everyone's fullest cooperation tonight. The sheriff turned the truck down a side road in the general direction of where they knew the infected group was being held. No one seemed to notice them, and why would anyone? They were in a truck on an army base, a base filled with vehicles moving back and forth. Still, Tess said, it was harder than it should have been. Max gave her a concerned look. She had shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. Well, we're in, Valenti said, parking the truck against a warehouse wall and turning off the lights and engine. The night around them pounded down in silence and almost pitch darkness. This part of the base seemed empty. Now what? Sorry, been sick. Max looked around, trying to get his eyes to adjust to the change in light. The building in front of them was nothing more than a vague black shape with no lights on. Illumination from the front of the gate area framed another building to the right in silhouette. Where from here are they being held? Max asked. 3 buildings over to the left, Valenti said, but it's guarded pretty closely. Max touched Tess again. Think you can hold on the illusion for a minute? If there's not more than 2 or 3 guards, Tess said, and you and I are going to have to act the part as well. Understood, Max said. Let's get closer and see what we're facing. The light in the cab blinded him for a moment as they opened the doors and climbed out. Closing the door sounded so loud in the still night that Max was sure it would bring armed guards running, but no one appeared. They moved to the left, walking down the side of the narrow road as if they belonged there. On a military base, Max had learned it was always best as to act as if you had belonged. Only guards whose job it was to question everyone stopped you. Everyone else had been so trained to mind their own business that they never bothered anyone who looked like they knew what they were doing, even a sheriff and 2 high school kids. At the edge of the third building over, Valenti stopped them, and they cautiously looked around the corner of the structure, making sure to stay in the shadows. 2 guards at the main entrance, Valenti said. Probably more inside. Makes sense, Max said, studying the distance across the open space between them. The warehouse they were using looked like standard army. 2 ambulances, lights off, were parked to one side. Otherwise, the guards could have been guarding an empty building as far as anyone was concerned. They're not posted to stop people from going in, Tess said. They're to stop the infected from getting out. So we go in as generals, Valenti said. Too hard, Max said, giving one more look at the front entrance where the infected were being held. He was coming up with a vague plan that just might get them inside and out of sight. He turned to Tess. Would it be easier to make us look like doctors? Yes, she said. I don't have to meet as many expectations. I can goof up and they probably won't notice. It'll be easier for us to act the part as well, Max said. That should cover any small mistakes you might make. She smiled at him, as if she believed he had made that suggestion to help her. He had to admit that it hadn't been his first thought. He was mainly concerned about her ability to get them inside the warehouse. There are usually second floors on these buildings, aren't there? Max asked Valenti. The ones I've been in usually have a type of walkway, balcony area, Valenti said, usually to post guards and observe experiments. That's what I remember as well, Max said. Stairs are usually through a door to the right of the main entrance. Valenti nodded. Yeah. We go in as doctors, Max said, that you, Sheriff, are bringing over from the hospital. We're just there to observe from above. Valenti nodded. Sounds good. Max was glad to have Valenti with him. The man had a real sense of what was possible. Max turned to Tess. Can you manage that? I can, she said. Max took a deep breath. All right, let's do this. Striding forward as if they belonged, they headed around the corner towards the entrance. Got them, Tess said softly beside Max. That meant she was making the guards ahead believe they were doctors approaching. Make up names for us, Max whispered to Valenti, without turning his head as they were halfway across the open space towards the entrance. We're from Albuquerque. Valenti nodded and didn't break stride. At the entrance, neither guard seemed to be bothered by the 3 people walking toward them. Again, Max figured that was because of the concern was holding the infected, not keeping people out. I'm Sheriff Valenti, he said as they got close to the guards. These are doctors Benning and Stevens from Albuquerque General. They're here to observe. The guard nodded and actually opened the door for them. Stairs to the right through the door, the guard said, nodding the door open for them as they went through. Thank you, soldier, Valenti said, hardly even slowing down. Tess and Max both nodded to the soldier, handling the door, but said nothing. Inside, the room smelled like an old warehouse. A door led straight ahead that was unguarded. Max figured there was at least one person on the other side. There was at least one guard on the other side of that door to keep the people in. There was another door to the right. Valenti opened the one on the right to expose a staircase leading up. When they were halfway up the stairs and the door closed behind them, Tess let out a deep sigh. Much easier than generals, she said in a whisper. Good job, Max said, following closely behind Valenti as they climbed the stairs. At the top, Valenti motioned that they should let him go first since there was no door. Max and Tess waited, the moldy smell of the warehouse strong now. Clear, Valenti whispered. Max stepped up and walked to a spot where Valenti was standing. It was in the shadows, and with the lights so bright below, Max doubted anyone down there would be able to see them. The sight was amazing and very overwhelming. At least 100 cots had been set up in rows on the concrete floor of the warehouse. Each cot had a green-skinned occupant, and 3 or 4 people in white lab coats were moving amongst the cots. Almost everyone was sleeping, although a few were sitting on the cots and a few others were reading. The place smelled like a hospital or like someone who had used too much cleaning solution very recently. Guards were stationed around the room every 20 feet or so, rifles in hand. And all the doors into the big space had guards on either side of them. How are we going to get the cure to all of them? Tess whispered. Not a clue, Max said, staring at the sight in front of him. It didn't look as if there were any way to get to all of those people. We're not getting down there, that's for sure, Valenti said. Max had to agree. Yet somehow they had to get down there to give the people the cure. Get down there and get out without getting caught. Impossible was the only word that kept coming to his mind. Hold on, let me shut this doors for my dogs here. Liz was amazed at how many military guards there were at different places in the hospital. It seemed as if every hallway had at least two, and each of them carried a rifle. And others stood in front of doors facing inward. The sight of the armed guards in the clean hospital corridors twisted her stomach even tighter. If she and Maria managed to get away with this, she was going to be a mess for days. Maria, whistling and smiling like there wasn't a care or problem in the world, passed the first guard with a "Hi, soldier." The guy didn't respond with anything but a shake of his head. Liz went by him without a word, gaze locked on her cart. All the doors of the hallway were open, and the first rooms beyond the guard and across from the guard contained green-skinned patients. Liz figured that any green-skinned person in a private room had to either come in first or was one of the ones the doctors were doing extensive tests on. Maria stopped her cart, filled a cup of water, and walked into the room as if she knew exactly what she was doing. Liz pushed her cart into position past Maria's near the door across the hall, filled a cup of water, and went into that room. At the time, the gaze of the guard seemed to bore into her. She kept her eyes on what she was doing and never looked at him. The female patient in the room was asleep. She looked to be about 70 and very frail. The green skin didn't help her appearance at all. Her breathing was labored, and she was hooked up to a heart monitor that was beeping softly. Liz felt bad about waking her, so she moved toward the bed and pretended to trip a little. A few drops of the water landed onto the woman's green arm. That should do it. The woman didn't stir. Liz set the cup down on the woman's tray and left. Maria was already out of her first room and was pushing her cart down the hallway towards the next room. Liz, again ignoring the soldier standing against the wall with the rifle, did the same, filling another cup with water and moving into the next room. The person in this room was a man, about her dad's age, who was awake and reading. His skin was very deep green, and his hair was brown with silver tinges. "Water, sir," Liz said. "I'm not thirsty," the man said, not even bothering to look up. "Oh, the doctor said you need to drink this," Liz said. "At least a sip so I can go to the next room." The guy, clearly not pleased, took the small cup of water, downed it, and then wadded the cup up and tossed it into the garbage can. "Thank you, sir," Liz said. He didn't say a word, just went back to reading. Liz had no doubt as she turned with a smile that he would be much happier in a few minutes. They managed to get to every room on the hallway and were wondering where to go next when a nurse wearing a hat came around the corner. "Water?" she said. "Good, they need some in this classroom. They're almost out." She pointed down the hall and went on past, clearly very busy. Behind them, in the room of the man reading, a shout echoed down the hallway. "Nurse! Doctor!" Maria grinned at Liz. "Seems a glass of water a day does more than advertised." "Let's get to that classroom," Liz said, heading her cart in the direction the nurse had pointed. This hallway was mostly offices, their doors closed and lights off. 2 guards stood in front of a set of double doors. "We were told to bring water to the classroom," Maria said to a young soldier with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. "In here," the guard said, moving aside and opening the door for them. "It goes down in front." "Thanks, cutie," Maria said, smiling at the young man. The soldier smiled back at her and Liz, watching them push their carts through the door before he shut it behind them. Inside, Liz was stunned to see about 50 people, all normal skin-colored, mostly sleeping in the seats of the large classroom. Water and other food had been set up for them in front of the stage. A number of people were snoring loudly, and the sound was echoing around the room. "This is where Isabel is," Maria whispered, so that the guard standing against the wall didn't hear. Liz scanned the people as they pushed their carts around the outside of the stage. Liz scanned the people as they pushed their carts around the outside of the chairs and down a ramp towards the stage. She didn't see Isabel until she and Maria were almost to the front. Isabel saw them almost at the same time. Her face lit up with surprise as she stood pretending to stretch. Then she casually moved out of the row she was in and down toward the front where the water and food was. Liz glanced around as Maria put her cart in a position where anyone could get a drink from it. None of the guards seemed to be paying attention to anyone. Most of them looked like they were almost asleep on their feet. "Sure is great seeing you two," Isabel whispered as he picked up a roll. "What are you doing here?" "We're distributing a cure," Maria whispered, patting the container of water on her cart. "Does it work?" Isabel asked, clearly stunned. "Like a charm," Maria whispered. "Green to normal in less than 5 minutes. We used Max's plasma." "Amazing," Isabel said softly, shaking her head as she pretended to pick over some of the Danish rolls. How did you two get in here? And in is easy, Liz said. Yeah, getting out is another matter, Maria said. But if we get the stuff to everyone, they won't have a reason to hold us. Isabel nodded. I wish I could help. You can, Liz whispered. Make sure everyone in this room has either taken a drink of this water or has some splashed on exposed skin just in case they have been contaminated but haven't turned yet. Either method works. Isabel glanced out over the mostly sleeping people and nodded. That's going to be difficult, but I think I can manage it giving a little time. I don't think time is going to be an issue, Liz whispered, at least not with these people. The ones who are already green are another matter. Isabel turned and looked right at her. You're telling me the green can become permanent? If we don't get this in or on them in time, Maria said. Liz only nodded. And if anyone starts to turn green before you get to them, Maria said, get some of the water splashed on them before they are taken out. It only takes a drop or so. Will do, Isabel whispered. Good luck. With that, she took a Danish roll from the cart, a glass of water from Maria's cart, and headed back to her seat. Liz, with Maria leading the way, pushed her cart back up the ramp toward the doors they had come in. They had a lot of people to find yet. It was going to be a long night if they didn't get caught, and even longer if they did. And that's chapter 12.
Chapter 13. Michael made his way carefully back through the edge of the forest towards where he had parked the water truck, trying not to make any more noise in the brush than he had to. Luckily, the night was fairly dark and gave him good cover. After what he'd seen near the cave, they were going to need all the help they could get. The air smelled of pine and fresh pitch, almost as if someone had been cutting trees. There was also a loamy odour that made me think of the fall. That made sense, he supposed. There were probably leaves on the ground which had been decaying in the last few months. No one cleared them here like they did in town. On the way up the highway, Kyle had thought he'd seen some lights in the trees near where the cave was, so Michael had decided it was better to check it out first. He'd stayed on the highway and driven past the turnoff they needed to a spot a few hundred yards down the highway and just over a slight rise. There he had backed the truck down onto a short side road and shut it off, telling Kyle and Alex to wait for him. They'd been awfully quiet on the drive. The human whining had stopped, but he could still feel their nervousness. The next time Maxwell wanted Kyle and Alex to come along on some kind of mission, he could babysit them. Michael was beginning to think they were more trouble than they were worth, and he wasn't sure why he was going to tell them about the forest. What he was going to tell them about the forest. What he had found there had surprised him. Scouring the area near the cave were at least 50 army men, many with rifles, most with flashlights. Clearly someone, somewhere, had put together a link between the people turning green in the small area of town and the groundwater used by those people in their homes. So now they were searching the area, and from the looks of the 3 tents already set up about 200 yards from the hidden cave, they were going to be there a while. More than likely, they were looking for some physical feature that could have contaminated the groundwater, or some chemical spill. There was no way they were going to let 3 high school students in a stolen water truck dump a load of water into that cave. He had moved around the searching men, scouting out the entire area, taking his time, trying to come up with some plan that would work. Ideally, he'd go back and talk with Max, and together they'd figure out a way to get this done. Max was somewhere inside the army base right about now, and if they were lucky, that left Michael to do the planning. After looking over everything, he thought he had an idea that might work. The truck loomed out of the darkness ahead of him, and he yanked open the door and climbed in. Yow, Alex said, holding his chest. You scared the crap out of me. Kyle just looked white. Warn us next time. What took you so long? Yeah, Max definitely gets babysitting duties next time. We got bigger problems than you being scared, Michael said, turning to face the other 2 in the dark cab. The army has about 50 men in there scouring the forest. Oh, great, Kyle said. They're going to think we're behind this. Michael ignored him. They figured out the water was contaminated, Alex said softly. It sure looks that way, Michael said. So much for this idea, Kyle said. He sounded almost relieved. No, Michael said. I think we can still do it. You're kidding, right? Alex asked. We're not going to drive a stolen truck in the middle of them and just dump the water. They won't believe it's a high school science experiment. No, Kyle said. They're going to think we caused this. That was the second time he'd said that. Michael couldn't hold back his surge of irritation. Then they'd be giving us a lot of credit, wouldn't they? The world's most brilliant high school kids. Certainly the strangest, Kyle muttered. Alex put a hand on Michael's arm, probably to calm him. Amazingly, it worked. Look, Michael said, we're going to finish this. All these people will be permanently green, Kyle. You think you can drive this thing? I've driven bigger, Kyle said, but I don't like the idea of driving it into the middle of an army camp. This beast is stolen, you know. Actually, technically, your dad let us borrow it, Alex said. Yeah, right, Kyle said. I want you to drive the truck into the cave, Michael said, handing him the keys, and I want Alex to empty the water. What are you going to be doing? Alex said. I'm going to be setting up a diversion on the other side of their location that will draw them all away from the cave before you go in, Michael said. Are you sure all of them will go? Kyle asked. Oh, trust me, they won't ignore what I'm going to do. Michael didn't tell them. He hadn't really figured out exactly what he was going to do, but he figured he could make enough noise to make sure no one either heard or saw the truck. Make it big and loud, Alex said. It will be, Michael said. How fast do you think you can get the truck in there and get the load dumped? 1 minute to get in and backed up to the mouth of the cave, Kyle said. Less than a minute to dump the load, Alex said. If Kyle will climb on top and open the hatch there, then he stops the truck. I can do that, Kyle said, nodding. Good. It will speed up the flow, Alex said. Another half minute back to the highway and out of sight after we dump the water, Kyle said. Michael nodded. Around them, the darkness and silence seemed very deep and heavy. It was the only chance they had of getting this done as far as he could see. Somehow the cure had to get into the water table, and just dumping it beside the road here wasn't going to do it. The water needed to be dumped down in those rocks in the cave at the same place the blue cells had got in. Okay, Michael said, I'm going to create a diversion on the other side of the hill from the cave to get everyone headed over there. 1 minute after you hear the first explosion, start the truck and come in. The first explosion, Kyle said. What the heck are you planning? Don't worry, Michael said. No one will get hurt, except maybe him, but he didn't add that. Where will we meet you? Alex asked. I'm going to double back to the cave, Michael said. I'll be there before you have to leave. If anyone's around, I'll be able to do something to slow them down. You two just move as fast as you can. Understood? And what happens if you're not here? Alex said. Leave me. Take the truck back and park it outside the fence and head back to the crashdown. You sure? Kyle asked. I am, Michael said, making his voice sound more confident than he really felt. He didn't want to think about the chance he might be left out in these woods with the army looking for him. 1 minute after we hear the first explosion, Alex said. Got it. See you at the cave, Michael said. He opened the door and squinted against the bright dome light, then jumped to the ground, closing the door behind him. This time, instead of heading into the brush, he started off down the highway at a steady jog. He needed to get around to the other side of the searchers, and the pavement was the easiest and quickest way. It seemed to take him a long time to get to a position beside the soldiers' locations. They were slowly working their way up the slight hill and had almost reached the top. The cave was now a good 300 yards behind them in the opposite direction. More than likely they had already checked it, found nothing, and had moved on. Michael, being careful to not make any noise and using the faint illumination from the soldiers' lights, moved down the hill looking for anything that might work as a diversion. Then up ahead he saw a small building, mostly covered in brush and weeds. It was clear it hadn't been used in years and years. He crept up towards it and then circled it as best as he could, making sure no one was inside. The windows were all broken out on the two walls he could see, and the roof had collapsed. When he got around back, it was clear there was no place inside of this building for anyone to be in. It was mostly just two walls of an old, small shed held up by the brush and trees that had grown up through it. Around it were four pretty good-sized trees that towered far out of sight in the darkness above him. This would be perfect, and far enough over the hill that the attention focused here, they wouldn't see the truck on the other side. He moved back, working his way through the brush, trying not to swear every time a sharp branch or stick sliced at him. He just wasn't made for this forest stuff, especially at night. He got about 50 paces away and found a hiding spot behind three large trees. From here, he figured he could set off the explosions and make a run for the road. If anyone saw him, they'd think he was trying to get to the highway. Then he'd circle back to the cave. He wasn't planning on anyone seeing him, though. The line of searching soldiers with their flashlights had just reached the top of the hill and started down. They were spread out about 5 paces apart and were moving slowly, searching every inch on the ground around them as they went. Boy, they were about to be surprised. Michael took a deep breath and reached down inside the energy he contained within him. Sticking out his hand at the remains of the old shed, he focused on the building and the trees around it, holding the energy back as much as he could until it was a force strong enough to cause a large explosion. Then he let it go. The remaining two walls of the old shed exploded in a sound that echoed through the still night, sending sparks and fireballs flashing through the trees, lighting up the entire place brighter than daylight. Up the hill, Michael could see every soldier drop to the ground, guns at ready. They were trained to react, and react they did. He focused on the large tree stump beside the now brightly burning shed. The tree exploded with a second thundering sound, then crashed to the ground up the hill, sending more sparks and shaking everything. Michael eased back, crawling on hands and knees in the now brightly lit forest until he reached another tree, 30 feet farther from the explosions he had just set off. Up the hill, some of the soldiers were back on their feet, working their way down the hill, guns ready. Michael, lying on his stomach, dug up more energy, feeling the drain to his system as he aimed at the tree beyond the cabin. The huge trunk of that tree exploded, sending wood and bark and fire everywhere. Again, the soldiers hit the ground. Behind them, a dozen others came running up the hill, over the hill. Good, those were the ones that were down in the camp close to the cave. Michael again crawled away, moving as fast as he could towards the highway, but he needed to do one more thing to keep them focused, one more explosion. He crawled around behind a tree and stood, using the tree to block him from the line of sight of the soldiers up the hill. He focused through the smoke and fire around the old shack on a large tree, a good 100 paces in the opposite direction he was going to go. Then, closing his eyes, he dug up as much energy as he could, opened his eyes, focused the energy through his hand, and aimed at the tree. The trunk exploded with the sound larger and louder than anything Michael had heard on the 4th of July. Ducking, he ran in the opposite direction towards the road as the fire from the last explosion flew through the air. If this had been summer, he would have been taking the chance of burning down the entire forest. But luckily, everything was so wet and green from the winter, no fire would spread fast, but he hoped it kept going long enough. The monster tree, whose trunk he had just blown, smashed to the ground, shaking everything. Michael ducked through some brush and out of sight of any of the soldiers. In 20 more paces to the highway and running down the road towards where Kyle should have taken the water truck into the forest to the cave. It seemed like a long time had gone by, but he knew it couldn't have been more than 2 minutes. That meant if their schedule was right, he still had a minute to get to the cave. Beside the highway, the forest was lit up like a patio party, the orange flames flickering and illuminating everything. Michael grinned. When he created a diversion, he created a diversion. Done.